Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for today's Peer-to-Peer World Virtual Conference. This conference is brought to you by 5 companies that serve nonprofits. They've come together to share their unique experience and knowledge with you today. These companies are Accelerate Charity Growth, Boodle AI, Cathexis Partners, Op3, and Turnkey. My name is Nu T, Editor-in-Chief and Content Director at Nonprofit, and I'm so excited to join you as the MC for today's conference. The title of this session is Captivate Your Volunteer Base to Increase Your Impact. During the session, please feel free to submit any questions you may have through the Questions tab in your GoToWebinar control panel. The speakers will answer the question toward the end of the session. And please note that this session will be recorded and made available online after today's conference. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Tiffany.
Thanks so much, Neil. Hi, everyone. I'm Tiffany Estell, and I work with Op3 and have been a part of their team since 2007. I primarily focus on helping with fundraising strategies, recruitment, and one of my favorite groups is volunteers. So I, in my personal life, find volunteering to be really one of my core values. I'm what some people might call a career volunteer. Initially, I always had a volunteer gig kind of going alongside my professional career. I decided to get in the nonprofit sector to marry those two, thinking that would meet all my needs, but then I wanted to work with other populations. I wanted to do more things, so here I am again volunteering. So I work with organizations like Make-A-Wish, the Special Olympics. I've been a tutor. I was on the crisis hotline for domestic violence and sexual assault, but currently I'm a mentor and I sit on a board for an organization called Project PAVE. So volunteering just runs through my blood, and I'm so excited to be sharing some information with you today. The trickiest part was drilling it down. So thanks again for joining us. This past summer, I worked with the Out of the Darkness Walk that is helping coordinate and work with their volunteers. So I got a chance to work with someone pretty exceptional who is Erin. So I'd like to introduce you to her and let her tell you a little bit about herself.
Hey there, this is Erin. So I manage the Out of the Darkness overnight walk with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I accidentally became a volunteer in 2011 for the overnight walk in New York City. There was something about serving eggs sometime after midnight. I could feel my life shifting from the experience. It was so profound that I was hooked on the event and lucky enough to join the staff in 2013 as a walker coach. So I've worked with and supported thousands of walkers and volunteers since. So now I'm lucky enough to manage the overnight, and I am truly never not fighting to prevent suicide and to end the stigma around talking about mental health. Because the overnight shaped my life in such a way, I literally can't put it into words. So I just wanted to say working with Tiffany and Op3 has been such a delight, and we can only hope to make volunteers feel the way that we felt. So thank you.
Thanks, Erin. So what will we cover today? Like I said, there's so many things. I could go on and on about volunteers, but really we're going to talk about utilizing your volunteers well, engaging your volunteers, and appreciating your volunteers. These are really some of the key components to recruiting them and retaining them. So when we look at utilizing them well, engaging them, and appreciating them, one thing you really want to consider is a volunteer's potential. A volunteer can do so much to add to your organization, and sometimes they become more elevated, add more, and bring more. They could become a donor. They might become a fundraiser for you. They're going to recruit more volunteers. They might join your board. They will educate people around them about your cause and your mission and really become advocates in the community, true ambassadors. So sometimes when we think about volunteers, they might get put a little bit on the back burner. We prioritize our focus on our staff, our boards, our participants, but it's truly worth it to invest in your volunteers as well. Erin, I know that the overnight is one of your events that relies really heavily on volunteer support, given that's what I worked with you doing this summer. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the overnight event is AFSP's national fundraising event. Each walker raises $1,000 or $700 for students and military. Just like the name suggests, it's truly overnight, and it's 16 to 18 miles for our participants. Our volunteers are literally the backbone of the event. We would not be able to do this without them. It's really beautiful. The volunteers we have are so dedicated to preventing suicide. 9 times out of 10, let's say, they are personally affected, just like our walkers. But instead of putting time and effort into fundraising, our volunteers literally take the time out of their lives to provide the physical efforts that we need. These people give their all, sometimes all night long, just to make sure that our walkers have a positive experience. So like I said, the overnight is 16 plus miles of healing and hope, grief, and guilt. It's like all the emotions you could imagine intertwined. So our participants feel all of these emotions, whether they're walkers or volunteers and everyone in between. But our volunteers take the time to cheer on and root for and smile and hug and high five our walkers the whole time. So our volunteers are really what is motivating our walkers to keep going and take their next steps all night. And just to note that the overnight changes cities each year, so we have volunteers that actually travel city to city with us. So it's impossible to describe their dedication.
Thanks, Erin. I mean, who doesn't love volunteers who are willing to work 24 hours to support a cause they care about? I'm a career volunteer, and some of those shifts you have are crazy. I don't know who comes at 3 in the morning, but they show up, and it's pretty remarkable. So, volunteers enrich your organization on so many levels, but one that you might overlook is really the bottom line. So just looking at the overnight walk and their volunteers and crew, if AFSP had to hire coverage for the time that the crew and volunteers give to their event, even at minimum wage, which we all want people to be making more than minimum wage, but as a federal minimum wage, that would cost them $46,000 for just one of their events. So while your organization might not have the same volume as AFSP, we can all agree that volunteers have a great return on investment. I know that when you work in organizations, and sometimes small ones, most people have a lot of things on their plate. And taking time with volunteers feels like one more expectation, one more thing to do on their to-do list. But the thing is, if you utilize your volunteers well and really tap into your organization's needs, there's room for that volunteer base to lighten your load, to alleviate some of your pain points, really make it easier for your organization to do what it does best. So let's talk a little bit about how you can just invest in them in practical ways, knowing that you all are busy and you have a lot going on. When it comes to volunteering, it's personal. It's personal for them why they decide to join us and why they want to give their time. So let's think a little bit about what really compels a volunteer to join you. If you know why they choose to lend their time, it can be so helpful to connect with them. So we're going to get a little crazy and use your chat feature. Now we're going to probably get a lot of responses here, so we'll just take a sampling. But type in the chat feature one reason you might volunteer. If personally or speaking kind of as a proxy for a volunteer, what are some reasons someone might volunteer? So let's see a few answers. Everyone's finding their chat feature, I can tell. I'm sure we're going to start seeing a lot of great things come in. In the meantime, I'm going to share some of our kind of ones that we expect would probably come up. A connection to the cause. Many people are personally impacted. Their life's been touched by it. A friend's life's been touched by it. They feel passionately. They want to work on your mission. Sometimes there's just a need for a volunteer, and they know that someone needs help, and they're willing to jump in. They want to do something that's rewarding. They want to stay busy, and sometimes it's just to kind of do something to fill some time, maybe in retirement. Some of our volunteers are required to lend their time. So whether it's by school or the justice system, often they may want to work with a different population or learn a new skill and to feel empowered, feel good, just create some positive energy. So just these examples, you can see it's clear there's so many reasons people might give their time. And it could be a combination of any of these that draw the volunteers to you. So knowing what motivates them is such a great way to target where they might be best utilized and what they might find most rewarding. So, for someone who has a hectic job and volunteering is a way to have some downtime but still be helpful, doing some good, a filing project might be great for them. That same filing project might be super disappointing to a volunteer who's hoping to work directly with your participants or to help spread the word about the work you do. So how do you really differentiate between these two types of volunteers? Well, when you're onboarding volunteers or in your application process, when they show interest, you want to make sure you're incorporating questions like, what motivated them to join you? Do they have a connection to the cause? What skills do they bring? Are there skills that they want to develop? What can be a little tricky is maybe Susie Cream Cheese is a graphic designer in real life, but that's not the muscle she wants to massage as a volunteer. She might be looking to wear a different hat. So keeping that in mind, what do they hope to gain out of the experience? If it's something like the overnight, it might be a healing experience for them, or they might want to honor someone. Maybe they want to be around more people. Maybe they just want to feel and experience the good in the world. We could all do a little of that. So these questions not only give you more insight into your volunteers, but it gives you a chance for them to share about themselves and to be heard. We'll be touching on that a lot in this session, because once you have a better idea why volunteers decide to lend their time, some of their kind of main hopes, you've got a much clearer path to engaging them well and making sure they feel helpful and appreciated. And those are the key elements to effectively retaining them. So what's a good next step? Evaluate and reevaluate your organization's needs. Your thoughtful preparation will truly add up. When your participants or your volunteers want to be utilized well and feel like they're helpful, you need to know where they could jump in to do the best for you. Do you need voices in the community, someone to help spread the word, maybe someone that goes to meetings or does press interviews or outreach events, maybe some office volunteers to help maintain the day-to-day, or volunteers to help support and execute your event? Just try and focus on areas where they can really add the most. Sometimes this is going to be tasks that are going to help alleviate your staff a bit so your staff can focus on the great things that they do. Other times you might be looking to find volunteers that are filling gaps in the talents of your current staff. You might come up with lots of things that they could do. Just try and prioritize where they can add the most and in what order. Once you have an idea what they need, then you know how to mine for these particular volunteers and really tap into their expertise and their skill set. So sometimes we just get people on board, we shove them into spots, this seems good, we're keeping them busy, they're happy, but maybe they've got a little more to offer, like our friend here, where she says, well, I could help with a bit of filing and general help around the office, or you might like to benefit from my 25 years of experience in software development and capital infrastructure investment experience. So maybe they've got a lot to add. So maybe you're looking to plan an event and you need some help with that. Who are the volunteers in your base that have planning experience? You're working on your brand guidelines and marketing. Do you have a volunteer that works in that field? Looking for some sponsors? I mean, who isn't looking for some sponsors? I could use some sponsors in my everyday life. Do you have a volunteer who has a strong community connection or network? Can they introduce you to them? So, there are lots of things you could come up with, and you might be thinking, yes, we want all of these things. Where can we find them? That's a great question. Start by asking about them. Know that if you're building or rebuilding your volunteer base, specify your needs when you're recruiting them. Be so clear in your volunteer posts, provide a good scope of the work you need, and be transparent about the time commitment. If someone's willing to give you weeks and weeks and weeks, and it's a project that's going to take that long, all you have to do is tell them that's the time commitment. If you already have a volunteer base, there is a pretty good chance some of these key players you're looking for, they're already within it. So just ask about them. You can learn so much about your volunteers by asking their story, letting them tell about themselves. It doesn't need to be a biography of their life because you're busy people, but at every stage of interacting with them, create opportunities to learn about them. So when you're opening an application or gaining interest, ask them. Mingling before an orientation or training, even in conversation during their volunteer shift. Hey, Susie Cream Cheese, thanks for coming to the office today. What brought you to us, or how did you learn about us? When they're checking in for the event, thanks for coming to give your time. Yeah, what brought you to us? How did you learn about us? Simple questions that you can work in organically in the conversation. Think of this as showing interest and not just interviewing them. People often feel good about sharing about themselves, so don't be shy to ask, what do you do for work? What are some of your other passions? What do you like to do when you're not volunteering? these types of conversation questions just open the door and give the opportunity for the volunteer to be seen and heard, and it might unveil ways for them to add so much more to your organization. So personally, I volunteered with the National Stroke Association's hotline where people call to get questions answered, resources, to talk to someone. And I started volunteering with them because my mom had experienced a stroke. Like most strokes, it was completely unexpected, and we were a bit ill-equipped to deal with it. So my mom lived on the second floor, and now she's wheelchair bound. And how do we deal with that? How do we navigate the medical community or the insurance companies? There was a lot I didn't know, and I consider myself pretty resourceful, and I was struggling. I didn't even know the National Stroke Association had resources. I had no idea. And so when I started to volunteer with them, someone asked what brought me to them. I told them my story. And shortly after I was volunteering, someone came to me and said, you know, we don't know a lot about caregivers and their perspective and what could be really helpful to them as far as resources. Would you come to an in-service and share your perspective with our employees? Help them understand what it's like from a caregiver's perspective. So I did that, and I felt super honored that they asked me and that I could share where I was coming from. And by the end of the year, my story became their end of the year fundraising campaign appeal, and I was able to share my story. For them, they got so much more out of me being a volunteer just by knowing my story. And I felt incredibly honored and so happy that I could help other people that were in my position and help an organization who could have lightened my load had I only known about them. So there's a lot of power in just asking people about themselves and their stories. So we're going to do a poll question. You know, thinking about your organization and kind of some of these things we're talking about when it comes to utilizing folks well, let's talk about, do you feel your organization maximizes its volunteer base? Absolutely. Our volunteers are a priority. We dedicate the time and resources accordingly. Somewhat, but there's room for improvement, or not nearly as much as we'd like or we know we could be. So the poll is open. Just use your feature to answer our poll question. We'll give it just a minute. Great. It looks like some of you, do it somewhat, but there's room for improvement. Others are saying that not nearly as much as we thought we could. A few of you are saying absolutely, which I love to see, that you're making them a priority. You're giving them all the special attention they need. That's great. Perfect. Well, it looks like so many of you agree that everyone maybe has some room for improvement. And when it comes to doing what you do with volunteers, part of utilizing them well is providing a great volunteer experience where they feel valued. So looks like your organizations are doing pretty well. Let's flip the script a little bit and talk about your personal volunteer experience. So we're going to do another poll question. Have you ever had an especially great volunteer experience? Yes, no, or I don't volunteer much. If you had a great one, you know it. It stuck with you. Maybe you talked to people about it. Have you ever had a really great one? 100% yes. So far, everyone's had a great experience. That's fantastic. That means organizations are doing the great things to spotlight, include, encourage, and support their volunteers. How about the flip side? Let's ask, have you ever had a bad volunteer experience? Let's open that poll question. All right, let's see if anyone's had a bad experience or has it all been amazing and wonderful. Looks like someone's had a bad experience. That's what I might expect. Wow, a lot of you have. Boy, it stuck with you. You might not have remembered all the really great ones, but it looks like you guys definitely remember the bad ones. Yeah, almost more than half of you have had a bad experience. So I know it's never our intention to have or create a bad experience for a volunteer, but it is important to acknowledge what types of things create and contribute to that, because it happens, whether we mean to or not. So some of the things that might really kind of give people a bad volunteer experience is, things like being unprepared or unorganized, letting your volunteers outwork you or look like they're outworking you. Sometimes when the volunteers get to something, it looks like the staff has tapped out. but they might be over having a great meeting. They might be doing some other things. So note that the perception might be that your volunteers are outworking you, even if you're kind of spreading yourself around, and we'll talk about how to work around that. Not expressing your gratitude, not being punctual. If you've ever been to volunteer somewhere and the volunteer coordinator comes in hot after you, or you're locked out of the building because someone didn't get there on time, it's pretty deflating and starts with a bad impression. Not having much for them to do, which sometimes is a product of having too many volunteers or not planning it out accordingly. When Susie Cream Cheese came to lend her time for 2 hours, you only had 15 minutes worth of work for her, and she just made the trip across town. Not providing clear or enough direction. We might take for granted that they know the task or that they know more about what your organization does. Being condescending or treating them as less than, and poor communication leading up to, during volunteering, or both. Maybe they had to email you several times to know where to go, what to bring, what they should expect. So we don't want to create those experiences. We want our volunteers to think we rock, that we're doing everything great, and so we're going to do like the opposite of those things. We want to really have ways to enrich a volunteer's experience.
If you don't mind, Tiffany, I'm just going to hop in here, give my 2 cents.
Sure.
So I'm going to casually chime in. Tiffany is super humble about her work and Op3's work. So I'm just going to start us off and say the things that what they do that really makes the overnight super special. The most beautiful and important thing they do is make the volunteers feel just as important as our participants and our staff. While, like I said, the volunteers are high-fiving and supporting our walkers, but Op3 and Tiffany are making sure they're spending a lot of time high-fiving them and supporting the volunteers and making them feel special. And there's never not a time on event when you look over and see Tiffany and Op3 staff leading by example and working alongside the volunteers. It simply shows them how important they are and how important the work they're doing is in that moment, regardless of what they're doing. Another thing is so simple, it's just saying thank you. It's the most important, the number one thing to do. And it's the simplest way to acknowledge someone, but the easiest thing to overlook because we're so busy and hectic on event. Op3, Tiffany, and the overnight staff make it a point to thank volunteers so much that they're asking us to stop, but we will never do that. So. And lastly, it's like a real gift that they have is that Tiffany and her team can understand and anticipate the needs of everything we need on events, whether it's tables and chairs or whether it's emotional support. They really make sure that each need is met, the necessary amount of volunteers are there, and we even have clear information on specific volunteer strengths and weaknesses, which make our events run very smooth, and that's the best thing we can ask for. So I just wanted to say thank you there.
Oh, thank you, Erin. I appreciate that. I think that, at Op3, we often say that the thank you is the only paycheck these volunteers are going to get. So I like to take it a little further and pay them time and a half. I mean, I've been on both sides, and I try and bring that perspective and put myself in the volunteer's shoes. I do think I hold some volunteers or some organizations to high standards and a high bar when I'm volunteering. And I think some of your volunteers probably hold you to that as well. And you can easily enrich a volunteer's experience by being prepared, being organized and ready for them, being transparent about the expectations and the time commitment. This might mean saying, it's going to be a long day. Take care of yourself. Take breaks when you need to, if that's appropriate. You might be telling them, you know what? There's going to be some downtime. We're going to work real hard this morning and have a little bit of a break before we kick into this afternoon. Just making sure that you're really clear about the expectations and what you're looking for them to do and over what period of time. Provide a robust training, and if you can give them the big picture of the event even ahead of time, that would be great. Recognize there's a learning curve, and sometimes it takes folks a little bit to catch up and be there where we need them. So just be patient with them, be kind, thank them. You can't say this enough, and treat them with respect. Explaining how to do something without dumbing it down. One of my favorites is using their name and introducing yourself so that they can use yours. If you don't already use name tags when people are volunteering, I encourage you to do so that everyone can say, thank you to the person by name. When you're giving instructions, it's much more kind to say, Susie Cream Cheese, can you help me move these tables? Or thanks, Susie, for helping me do that project. And then they're not just looking for the girl in the red t-shirt. They know that Tiffany is who they're going to connect with if they have questions. Asking if they have everything they need to be successful. Once you're giving them something to do, making sure you're setting them up for success and that you're taking care of them physically, emotionally. That can mean a myriad of things, but people love candy, snacks, water, breaks. Those will really get her done. You know, one of the good traits we kind of spotlight here is being transparent, and it's so important. You know, some volunteers are giving their time because they want to contribute to the success, but it might not always be obvious the way that they're volunteering and how it impacts your big picture mission. And, you know, not all tasks for volunteers are going to give them the feels. You know, they're not going to necessarily see the direct impact to the work they're doing. And, you know, some volunteers love that kind of what we consider busy work. They don't need anything challenging. They just want to pass the time. But others are going to shy away from that if they think you're giving them work that's not helping carry out your mission. So when I was a wish granter for Make-A-Wish, I loved interviewing the kids. I loved celebrating their wishes with them. I did not love the paperwork. That was just part of it. But I knew the paperwork kind of took care of the kid and their wish. So sometimes you get the attitude of, oh, today I used my university degree to fold invoices and stuff envelopes. Ugh, people act like that's the worst. But it's important for you to turn what they think is busy work into impact work. Every organization has these tedious, maybe mundane tasks that need to be done, and they're more suitable for volunteers and the staff, but they might not be glamorous. And a good example of this is stuffing envelopes or preparing mailings. And I think a lot of organizations make the mistake of just giving the logistics. Put this in the envelope, put the label on it, run it to the postage meter, and leave them to it. But be honest, if this is something that you need, this is a support, they're helping support something that's important, and elevate that volunteer's experience, bring a little background, attach value to the efforts that they're doing. So you could say, Susie Cream Cheese, thanks so much for helping with this mailing project. These brochures get distributed to social workers in local hospitals to help the social worker paint a better picture of our services for families in need and connect these families to our valuable resources that they might not know were available otherwise. Because the hospitals always have a good supply of these handy, we're able to reach and serve more families. So thanks again for helping us carry out this essential piece. Taking just a minute to explain that to Susie gives her the big picture. She's doing more than just stuffing envelopes, and it creates a pride point for her. She knows what it's doing. If it were an example where someone is helping with a mailing that's for fundraising, and you've done this campaign before, it raises a bajillion dollars, tell Susie, this campaign is really meaningful for our organization. It's our biggest fundraiser, and last year we raised this much money, so we know that what you're doing is going to help us succeed. So just really reach in there and let her know how she's adding value. It seems like such a simple thing to do, but it might be something where you just haven't yet made the time. Everything you're asking volunteers to do is for the success of your organization. There's probably not a job that's not needed. You're not wasting their time, but fill their time with more of what you're able to do because of them. That automatically creates a level of appreciation and lets them know that they're vital. They're helping you do really great things. So that brings us to appreciation because, you know, we've got some ideas about how to get volunteers in the right seats on the bus, how to utilize them well, make sure that we're expressing gratitude all the time is another way to thank them and let them know that we appreciate their dedication, we appreciate their time, we value their wish to help our mission be successful. So what I run into occasionally is that organizations really want to do this well, but they just don't find the time. So I want to spend some time on this because you might not feel like you have the time, you might not feel like you have the budget, but volunteers feel appreciated in lots of different ways. So for some of them, it's simply just saying thank you, and that's enough. For others, they might want you to erect a statue. It is a whole gamut of what you could do. So I just want to share some ways that you can show appreciation that kind of falls somewhere in between the simple thank you and the statue. One of those is spotlights and shout outs. Use social media and your newsletters and your website to spotlight great volunteers. This doesn't take much time, and it gives you a chance to not only show the volunteer that you appreciate them, tagging them in a post also means that their friends and family can see what they're doing and gives them a really public acknowledgement. For some people, a public acknowledges what they want in front of the crowd, in front of their staff, in front of fellow volunteers. Others might appreciate something that's a little more low-key or private or intimate. So Doing those spotlights and shout outs and scheduling them, having a volunteer of the month, things that really help them look like they're one of your key players just as much as anyone else that's involved with your organization. A birthday email. So this seems pretty simple, and if you haven't captured your volunteers' birthdays, it's not as important to get the year. They may not want to give you that information, but the month and day. I volunteer for the Children's Museum at 4 of their kind of anchor fundraising events or key events. I don't go any other time. To be honest with you, I don't even like children very much, and if I'm around a lot of them, it makes me very uncomfortable. They're very unpredictable. So I try and keep my volunteer scope at the museum just to those 4 events. But the first year after I volunteered with them, the week of my birthday, on Monday, I got an email from their volunteer coordinator. It wasn't a generic kind of form email through a service. And it said, Tiffany, we know this is your birthday week, and we just want you to know that we celebrate you this week and all year long. It was 2 sentences, but I was so moved and surprised, like, wow, someone's keeping track of this. And she's sending this each week. She's got some sort of reminder that pops up that my birthday's coming up. I happen to love birthdays, especially my own. I was really touched. It actually made me want to do more for them and give more to them because I knew they didn't have to do this. The Children's Museum has a lot of volunteers, and I felt so singled out. Now, I know there were other people who had birthdays that week that got the same email, but it really spoke to me that they took the time. Other things you can do is there might be other milestones. Maybe your volunteers have an anniversary. They've been volunteering with you for years, and you're keeping track of that or how much time they've given you. Being able to maybe have the whole staff or a whole department sign a card that you can give to them for that anniversary or send to them. Acknowledging the time they've served. I got a funny certificate once that said I just started, and it's like, thanks for your 6 hours of service. I was like, well, you didn't really have to print this, but it was so sweet that they did. But for the person who did 300 hours of service, it was pretty remarkable that they were able to quantify that and say to her what she had done. If you're able to really make that go a step further and say the direct impact. So maybe someone came in and did a bunch of invite calls to your event or to something that you needed folks to RSVP, being able to circle back with them and say, because you came in this week to make those invite calls, we already have 100 RSVPs. Thank you for making that happen. Also doing notes about other things that are happening in their lives. Pay attention to your volunteers' lives. There's so many things that they are doing outside of volunteering for you, and if you can create a relationship with them and know, you can also respond to some of those things. Maybe they're having surgery. Maybe they called and said they couldn't come this week because they have a cold, and you drop a get well card in the mail. Maybe they got a new job, and so their volunteer schedule is going to change a little bit, congratulating them on that success and celebrating that with them. Heaven forbid they had a loss or a death in the family. I mentioned working on the hotline for the National Stroke Association. I did that, and I felt really great, but I had to stop because unfortunately my mom was diagnosed with a terminal cancer that was pretty aggressive, and going there was too hard to fit in my schedule and too hard emotionally. So I let them know I was very sad that I couldn't be a part of the organization in that capacity. They kept in touch with me, and I was very moved that they sent a sympathy card from their entire staff, signed by everyone with personal notes about how much they knew I loved my mom and how they were so happy that they could share part of her story in life with me. Had I not done that, I wouldn't have missed it. I wouldn't have known and said, oh, the Stroke Association, how dare they not acknowledge my loss? But the fact that they did really resonated with me and stayed with me, and I still give to them as a donor to reciprocate that sweet gesture. Encourage your participants. Like if you have participants or program recipients and they can write thank yous to your volunteers, sometimes you have a family that says, what can we do? Is there anything we can do to pay it forward? Is there any way we can do to return the gesture of your services? Have them write thank you cards to your volunteers that you can distribute to them. Sometimes you get an email from someone who says thank you, or a letter that they say thank you, asking them, can we share this with our volunteers? Sometimes we share it with our staff, but we might forget to share it with our key players who helped that service come to life for them. So capturing those moments and being able to pass them on to them. We did a project for the overnight that we called Volunteers Have a Lot of Heart. So In nonprofit budgets, we didn't have a big thing that we could do. I would love to throw a parade for the volunteers. Like, I like to dream big. But on a budget, I decided to go with heart sticky notes. So at the overnight, people come there for personal reasons, and they come to give part of themselves to this experience for everyone. So when they checked in, we said, we know that volunteers have a lot of heart, and you're giving so much of yourself, and we want to spread some of that love beyond just right here. So we had every volunteer, of which there were 200 over the course of the day and night and morning, to write why they were there, what their connection was, or any words of inspiration they'd like to share as a volunteer. And we built all of their sticky note responses on a wall of our volunteer tent, so anytime participants passed, they could look at it. Our staff came and took pictures and read them. They worked as inspiration for volunteers who came on later shifts. They read them and decided what they wanted to put. It was so heartfelt, and sometimes they wanted 2 sticky notes because they wanted to go on and on. It cost us so little in time and money, but it really was the first time I feel like we did a really good job at the overnight of letting them have a visual of why they were there and being really clear about, I'm coming here with purpose. I'm bringing something to this. It means something to me, and I want to share it with folks. There are people who elected not to do it, which was fine, and there were others who just felt like, wow, no one's asked me. In their community specifically, their cause might be a place where people feel alienated and alone, and it was a way to create a visual that they weren't alone. They were there with this army of really incredible people doing really incredible things. So a fun way to kind of even take that a step further is getting heart stickers and having them do the same, but putting it on their sleeve, so their heart's on their sleeve. See what I did there? That is just another way that when they're walking around volunteering, they can see it and people can engage with them. Check in with your volunteers or communicate when you're not asking them for something. Give them a highlight or a win that you've had at your organization. So often we only reach out to volunteers when we need something. So it's nice when sometimes you just get a nice little correspondence that's not asking anything in return. Ask your board to make thank you calls to your volunteers. I sit on a board. I know that my colleague Erica does, and we think this is so fun. It's such a great way to engage folks, and they feel like we are maybe really important people in the organization, that we took the time means a lot to them. So engage your board and ask them to do some moments of gratitude and calls. If they don't have time, would they send an email? Could they sign notes at your next board meeting that you could just mail on their behalf? So these are just kind of easy things that you could do that don't cost a lot of money. If you have money, yeah, that volunteer appreciation party is great. A picnic is fantastic. If you've got any swag, I don't know anyone that loves free stuff more than volunteers. Nope, correction, participants might like things more than volunteers, but a volunteer loves free things. If you can get a branded thing in their hand that also acts like an ad for you, a t-shirt, a water bottle, it's also doing it one extra little step for you. Ask them to be your guest. I mentioned the Children's Museum, and one of the events I do for them is a gala. And what's beautiful is they have 2 shifts, and the first shift has the last hour that they're a guest of the event, and the second shift has the first hour where they're the guest of the event. So you get to go around and eat the food, you get to drink if you can do it responsibly. You also become a donor because they suck you into their silent auction and you're bidding on all the things that you know you need more than anything else. And for me, it was great because also when it became time for my shift, I knew where everything was, like the bathrooms. Everyone knows where the restroom is. I knew kind of what the process was if someone needed to bid on something. My belly was full. I had a lovely glass of wine. It was really fantastic, and it didn't cost them very much. It was just a few more, there were maybe 30 volunteers out there, a few more glasses of wine or beer, a few of their little nibbles. They had like snack stations, so it wasn't a plated dinner. It was just little mini corn dogs and fun things that kids like. It was an adult event, and it made me feel like I was an adult included in it. So if you have the chance to let them be a guest, that would be fantastic. That would be a great way to let them know that they're appreciated and that you want them to have a great experience. And then think about your partnership. Do you have a partnership with a restaurant that helps you and you can pass along something for your volunteers? Tickets to a sporting event or a production. One of the organizations I work with has a very close connection to the Denver Broncos, which is my favorite NFL team, the Broncos. And as a special thank you to me and another volunteer, this year we got to go to Broncos training camp as VIPs. And so again, it was something that was shared with them as an option that they were able to pass along to us. It felt really cool. I'd never been to training camp. I never would have expected it. And it was just such a nice gesture to actually maximize their relationship they have with an existing partner. Let's go to our last poll question. We're talking about ways to appreciate folks and how to utilize them well. So we're going to open it up and ask you, thinking about it, how would you describe your organization's current volunteer experience? Excellent, we're crushing it. We try, but we could do better, and I don't know. All right, so start entering your responses on our poll, and we'll see how you're doing. Yeah, a lot of you try. Everyone's trying. They're trying to do their best. They could do better. Some of you are crushing it, which is fantastic. You're all able to crush it, and it looks like the majority of you really feel like there's room for improvement, and that's fair. We're all trying to do the best we can do, but what could we do that could maybe be even better? What are some best practices that we could do? Because it looks like we all want to do a little bit better. So the one thing I would say first is what we talked about a lot. Ask about your volunteers and their experience. Find moments and ways to build relationships with them, build rapport. It's so great when you feel like you're not just a number, you're not just an afterthought. Survey your volunteers. So you want to survey them to maybe ask how they like to be appreciated so that you can find things within that scope and that range that are reasonable based on their responses. One that I really find is unique and helpful is sometimes just survey your volunteers and find out if there's surprising benefits they've had from volunteering with you. When I was on the hotline for the sexual assault and domestic violence, it was for 1 year, every week, for 52 weeks, for 4 hours, and it was not for me. I realized on week 2, I maybe made a poor choice in where to volunteer. I felt like it was more than I thought it would be. So come week 52, I was like, thank you for this wonderful experience, and goodbye. And what was surprising is that it was one of my most challenging volunteer positions, but from it, I became a really empathetic listener. I learned how to try and empower people with decisions and let them be the expert of their own lives. Prior to doing that volunteer job, I was bossy. I'm still a little bossy, but I really thought I had it figured out for people sometimes and was more than happy to share that information. And volunteering on that hotline meant that I gained a whole skill set I didn't have before, and I became a better friend. I became a better colleague. So it was something that was kind of surprising. You might find that there's some surprise benefits that you can also pass along and share, whether it's with your staff or with other volunteers. It's just useful to ask them. Present them with the challenging roles. Now, they can do the hard stuff in projects. If you have things that you need help with, make sure that you ask them to do it and invite them to step up and do the hard things. There's a national organization that has hundreds of volunteer photographers who go into hospitals when a family has experienced the loss of a baby, and they capture professional images for them that are retouched heirloom photos in black and white. So that family has a family photo or photos of their baby that they wouldn't otherwise have. When I learned about this organization, I thought, how in the world do they get volunteers to do this? And the reason they do is because they invite them to step up. They bring them to the challenging roles. For these volunteers, to hear them talk about how rewarding it is for them, and while it is challenging, how much it's changed their lives, it's because that's what they needed. That's what they needed to carry out their mission. That's where they needed volunteers the most. So they asked them to do the hard thing, and they did them. Being on the hotline was a hard thing, and they did it. So just look at what you need, and if there are challenging things, don't be afraid to empower volunteers to do them. I've been at many a conference table where people say, oh, we can't ask volunteers to do that, or no volunteers will do that. Invite them. They will tell you real fast if they will or will not do it, and by giving them perspective of what it adds to your organization might motivate them. Or maybe they've been volunteering for years and they've really nailed stuff in the envelopes and nailed making the calls, but they could do so much more. So just invite them to do those things. Be flexible. And think about opportunities that might be unique. Not everyone has a chance to carve out 2 hours of the day to come to your office. So maybe there's something they could do at home in that same scope of time. So an example of this is that our local Dumb Friends League is a big animal shelter and care facility for animals. It's very, very large, has a huge amount of volunteers, but there are sometimes volunteers who can't come in during their business hours. So they have some key volunteers who come in once a week. They take a bunch of sympathy cards, and they write sympathy cards to anyone who is scheduled or plans to come in to unfortunately put their dog or cat down. Euthanizing a pet is unthinkable, and so these volunteers are taking time to say some words of comfort and encouragement to these families. And so it's something that they could do that's outside of the box. So try not to create barriers for volunteers because it doesn't fit into your timeline or doesn't fit into your office schedule. Maybe it's appropriate for a volunteer to make the calls from home. Just think about, are there ways that you could expand what volunteers are doing if you could be more flexible and unique? And lastly, illuminate for your staff the value of volunteers. In staff meetings or trainings, talk about what the volunteers are bringing to the table. Some organizations quantify it that say, you know, this month we had 300 hours given to us by volunteers. This is what it saved our staff time in hours. This is what they contributed. This is what they added, so that everyone knows that volunteers are key players. They are walking alongside you. You know, sometimes if you're lucky enough to have a volunteer coordinator, they're the only people that know. It's like the best kept secret about how awesome these people are. So make sure and share it with your staff. If there's someone that's coming in and they have a great story, you know, say Susie Cream Cheese is coming in today to volunteer from 2 to 4, and here's what brought her to us. Here's what she's been giving to us, so that your staff has a chance to also feel included and know that they can contribute. Every staff member that passes Susie should say hello to her by name. They should thank her for her time. They should ask about her. Any interaction that expands beyond one person that they're working with makes them feel like they're part of the team. So those are just some easy ways and best practices of what you could do to help your team feel like they're a part of it, make your volunteers feel like they really are appreciated and valued and really some key players. I love this quote from Mr. Rogers. He says, "When I was a boy, I would see scary things in the news. My mom would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." To this day, especially in times of disaster, I remember my mother's words, and I'm always comforted by realizing there's so many helpers, so many caring people in this world, and there are so many helpers. There's so many people that want to give to your organization, who want to make it stronger, who want to help you succeed, and using these best practices that we've shared will help you in recruiting them. It'll help you in retaining them. Word of mouth is such a powerful thing, and it'll do great things for you when volunteers have a positive experience, and it can harm you if they have a poor experience. We saw in the poll that almost everyone had a poor experience, and if the volunteer feels that way, it's so hard to want to come and volunteer again. You want your time to feel valued. You want to feel like you're giving and bringing something to the table. So just know that these volunteers are saving your organization thousands of dollars. You likely can't afford to hire them. So taking good care of them and keeping their needs top of mind is really critical. Let's think just about our $46,000 cost example from the overnight. That's a lot of money. And I bet if you had a sponsor who gave you $46,000 or you had a donor that came in with a $46,000 check, you would be doing so much to show your appreciation to them. You would be managing that relationship to keep them connected and involved no matter what was on your plate, no matter how busy you were. So the same is true for volunteers. So just make sure your organization is utilizing them well and appreciating their worth, and you will get so much out of it. It's a priceless experience, and it's so huge if you just take the time and really carve it out for them and make volunteers an equal partner in the great things that you are doing. So I'd love to open up for questions. I want to thank you all for joining Erin and I and allowing us to talk about volunteers and our experience with them. Erin didn't mention, but she also volunteers, so we feel like we can walk the walk with you And so if there's questions, let's open it up to the questions section. And if there are questions that you'd like just for us to answer not publicly, you can email us, and our email address is here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. I see one question that came in through the question panel, and it's, do you have any recommendations or thoughts on having an online volunteer portal to help with the overall experience?
Do you mean an online portal that they can access themselves with resources and things of that nature, just to clarify?
I believe so.
Okay. So I really think it's great if you can have a place that's exclusive for volunteers where they can get the information. I use portals for a few organizations where it tells me what upcoming events are there, where I can sign up for the shifts. It tells me kind of how it keeps track of how many hours and what I've volunteered with. So for me, it's a nice management piece. And if your organization has the opportunity to utilize that, I think it's better. Anything where you can really navigate people to one place, and also might alleviate you from answering all of the questions. If I know the portal tells me what to wear, what to bring, what time to be there, that's a great option for me. So I would recommend, if you have that option, I think it's great to utilize it and really make sure that it's comprehensive for the volunteers.
Awesome. So we have one that just came in that I think is really good. How do you keep engaged those volunteers who have been involved for many years when they get that volunteer fatigue?
That's a great question. I think one of the ways that you can do that, if they've been coming for years, sometimes they've been doing the same tasks in those years, asking them, are there other things that they'd like to do or other places they'd like to be involved? I think sometimes it's nice if you can connect an experienced volunteer with a new volunteer and they can act as a mentor or kind of a buddy for them. So they're actually bringing someone up in the ranks. I think, to be honest, give them a break. If they've been coming there every week since, 1979, tell them, hey, you know what? You do so much for us. How about you take this week off and just do something that you're taking care of you? I think acknowledging that and saying, if someone's telling you, or you can tell they're kind of signs of burnout, offering an out as a break, I think sometimes people feel guilty about saying they need to step away for a little bit. And folks need to recharge. So giving them the option that if you need to take a break, we're always happy to have you join us again when you're ready. But I feel like most times, if you really appreciate your volunteers, you don't outwork them, you give them a variety of ways to be helpful, I think that can combat that fatigue in a great way. And I think also utilizing them in a way where they can help another volunteer or really use their expertise and be that shining star.
Great stuff. So a question I have is, nonprofits in general are very kind of strapped with resources, and that includes time. So can you talk about how to engage volunteers who have a small staff with limited time?
I think that's a great question, and I feel like that's often the response you hear when people say, well, we just don't have the time. And I think trying to be as concise as possible. When I say engage volunteers and ask them how they're doing and getting them set up for a project, I think that can be really brief if you're prepared. And you take that time a lot of times with clients, you take time with your fellow coworkers. So my suggestion is trying to bring the volunteers a little bit into the fold and don't make it a time-consuming thing. And, for some volunteers, I feel like they're going to want to talk to you and tell you their whole life, and you're going to have to draw the line. They're like, all right, Susie, I love hearing about you. I've got to get back to my desk and help out with this or do that. But I also feel like when it comes to engaging them, it sometimes will sound like a cop-out that we don't have time. I feel like we've all got the same amount of time, and just trying to distribute it a little bit. So if you know that you have volunteers, if you prepare for them, often it's going to take you less time and be less distracting than if you didn't prepare for that office volunteer and now they're popping in every 2 seconds because they need more guidance or they need more help. And I think that when it comes to volunteers, if you treat them and think of them as being a valuable asset, maybe some of the things that are on your plate currently can fall into a volunteer's hands. So a good example of this is you have to reach out to every member of your organization to check in with them about something. It's part of your role. It's what you do every week or every month, and you're reaching out to them. It's so great if you get a seasoned volunteer that knows about your organization, knows what you're trying to glean from that person, and can actually take on those calls. Training and get a volunteer up to speed to do that might mean that's one less task on your plate. What you need to be really careful of is trying to hold on to everything. So often we want to keep everything close to our chest. The only way to do it right is if I do it myself. But when you have trusted volunteers that are trained well, they're passionate about your organization, you can often mine for the ones that are skilled enough to do some of the tasks that your staff is doing. So when you're evaluating your needs, really take a look and think, are there things on our plate that a volunteer could do? And having belief in them that they're capable people. Now, there's going to be someone who is best suited for labels on an envelope. That might be their level of expertise and what you need them to do. There are those people. Keep them in that space and keep them happy and let them know that that's a valuable task as well. But if you've got someone who is really a dynamo and you're just wasting their talent on things that really are important but could be even better, find the things your staff is doing and find ways that volunteers might be able to alleviate those pain points instead of thinking you don't have the time or there's too much on your plate.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. How do you recruit volunteers who want to fundraise and not just plan a party?
How do you recruit volunteers who want to fundraise? That is a great question. I think that recruiting quality volunteers, I think posting what you actually need, and I think starting to set them up for that potential ask from the beginning. I think that when people know what to expect, like say they want to join the party, great. We need people to help organize a party, and you are so passionate about our cause. It'd be so great if you would also be willing to set up a fundraising page and spread this with your family, or invite your friends and family to come to our fundraiser so they can see the work that we do. Really start to create opportunities for them or set the expectation. Sometimes volunteers don't know what they don't know. So if you say, you know what, we've had some killer volunteers who've done such a great job with fundraising, connect them with someone who fundraises, or say, like, we've set up a fundraising page for you so that you're not just helping with the event, you're helping it be successful on another level. I think you have to be honest, and I feel like anytime fundraising is involved, be unapologetic if you need their help with that. And I think if they feel valued and feel like they're contributing something, they'll be more inclined to want to fundraise for you. I think the other thing is make fundraising easy. Make sure you have resources for them. Fundraising is incredibly intimidating for people who haven't done it before, but just helping them understand that you're not asking for money for yourself. You're asking people to help you make an impact. You're inviting people to help you do something extraordinary and really touch people's lives. When you flip the perspective and the script a little bit on it for them and let them know, like, it's so easy and we're here to help you do it, they'll be more inclined to do it. And as soon as you have one volunteer who's done it as a success story, you tell all the other volunteers. You use their testimony that in a hot spotlight in your newsletter, Susie Cream Cheese raised $1,000 for this. It's so fantastic. We really appreciate her. If you're interested in fundraising or talking to Susie, here's how she did it. And just giving them a roadmap to how to do that might be a good way to turn those folks who, the party people who only want the fun stuff into party people who also are fundraisers. At a minimum, I would ask, maybe they will make a donation themselves. It can be tricky to navigate that. I think they're more inclined to want to ask other folks, but sometimes the people say, I don't want to do that, but I'd love to make a donation. And if you can put a dollar amount to, say, for example, $50 does X, yeah, Susie, if you raise $100, we can provide 400 more meals, things like that.
Awesome. That's great. Well, thank you so much, Tiffany and Erin, for joining us for Peer-to-Peer World. Your insights have been incredible in this session.
Thank you for having us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
So we've reached the end of our time for this session. So thank you so much for our audience for listening in. And if you're interested in learning more about peer-to-peer, you can check out the Peer-to-Peer Advanced Conference happening in Philadelphia in November. You can find out more at peer-to-peer, p2p.nonprofitpro.com. And please note that if you're going to be joining us for the next session, you'll need to log in using the link that you received via email when you registered. Have Have a great day, everybody.
Great. Thanks so much.